Alright, so I've got the neck blank, the fretboard side is plain flat. I've cut off the back end for my heel cap, and that'll go something like this. Once I attach it, we're going to cut out a tenon today, but before we do all of that, we have to cut our channel for our truss rod. And so the truss rod I like to have sit just shy of the break where the angle break is, and then I'm going to come back with a drill bit and cut a hole in there, sort of how fender is, and it'll be, you know, embedded in the wood, and then we'll put a, you know, a decorative cover over it once we're close to being done. But so to cut the channel for this truss rod, I use a router. It's a really skinny bit. It's the same width as this, and then I've got a hand chisel out some spots for the top. And I use this slide. My router fits right in there, and I'm going to clamp this down on top of the neck to these 2 points that I've got marked out. So it'll be something like this. Then I'll run it back, do, you know, 5 or 10 passes until I get to the right depth. And then we'll just make sure it fits. After that, we can cut out the tenon and then mark out our tenon on our body, get the neck to fit into the body. Then we'll add our little decorative, you know, fretboard hider things. At that point, I can start to look at getting the fretboard attached to the neck. And so I'm going to go ahead and focus on the neck today, see how far I can get as far as cutting out our tenon, laying out where it's going to fit, where I want the frets to end. You know, do I want to go far into the body? Do I want it to be real high up, like on, say, a PRS? Probably going to do something like that, traditional. So I'll need just a little bit of wood to cover that area right there. We can get to gluing up the binding after we cut the fretboard out. So this is going to start coming together really quick. We cut the truss rod channel, and we can get back to probably cutting the tenon out. We'll see. Alright, I've got my truss rod channel cut out. I used a router bit in that setup. Now I'm going to drill the access to the truss rod. I've still got to clean this up a little bit, and once it's in there, this is actually going to fit inside of there, so I need to cut this hole first. The way I do that is I mark out, I hold the top flush with the top of the body, and then I come over and I figure out where those two meet, and I come over and I put a little dot. And so that's as far towards this way, towards the bridge, as I want to cut. So I'm going to start my hole a little north of that, so that when I come in, you'll be able to, this bit should meet about right there. To do that, you start drilling down, and then you pivot it and come in as flush as you can. So to do that, I'm going to lock it up in my vise and use this handy dandy hand drill. This thing is so awesome. I love this drill bit. This drill, the hand drill. So start about there. Couple of turns. I get down a little bit. Okay. Then I want to slowly pivot to get under that shelf right there. Makes a really clean access point, and it's real easy to hide with with a cover. This way, where they meet is sort of hidden by the neck, and we'll have a volute right about there, so there's tons of room for easy access with your Allen wrench. Once we get to the final steps and we do a full setup, get into how the truss rod works. I feel like I'm gonna punch through. Closer. I tried doing this with electric drills, and you can miss your mark really quick with those things. At least with this way, I can go real slow. See, I just punch through. Clean out some of that material. The inside. Come back a little bit. Get this guy, hog out some more. Shave this to get a real clean edge. It fits really well, but I like these to be tight. There's no sense in having a loose truss rod in here. And if that happens, you can always add caulking to the bottom of your channel when you install the rod. Just make sure it's flexible enough to allow the rod to do its job. It is so humid today. I'm dying. Okay. Yes, it's going to take a little bit more coaxing. Really thin. this is probably a better way to do it. Yeah, see, I've already busted the top. That's okay. This is all going to get covered. In fact, the fretboard's going to sit over that area right there, so it happens. It's really not a big deal. So we'll have a cover over that. That's what I learned. The first one that I built, I was so tedious, and I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And there's just no such thing. There's just no such thing as perfect. And you'll find that the things that you fret about, nobody even notices. So I'm going to keep, let's see, yeah, looks like it will fit. See, and there we have it. So there's your truss rod. Easy access with a Allen wrench, and I'll clean up all these holes. So we got our fretboard that's going to fit on top of there. I need to cut. We got a good clean seam. If this wasn't bound, it would disappear and it would look like a one-piece neck because it's all from the same board. But let's see. So our fretboard is going to end roughly here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the 20th fret. And I like to mark the 12th fret, just so I have an idea of where I'm at. And we're going to take this body, and in just a second we're going to use the laser level again, and I'll try to turn off more lights so we have a better view. But we're going to take this new center line that I've drawn that goes through the headstock, and we're going to line it up with the center line that we have drawn on our body. And we're going to clamp this down. Before that, I got to cut out the tenon. So right now, I'm getting ahead of myself. So if our fretboard goes to about there, we want the frets to end about like that. That'll be real pretty right there. So that curve will go up into that. Yeah, that looks nice. So what I'm going to do is mark where my body is going to be. Perfect. And so the truss rod goes into the body a little bit, which is what you want. You want to make sure that that truss rod has something to anchor against. So right here is where my tenon needs to start. What we'll do is I'll cut, I like to start my tenon a little shy of where it is, just so I have room to play. It looks like there's actually some imperfections right there, so I'm going to take this back a little bit. And we'll do our tenon. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So we've got our tenon marked out. What I'm going to do for the tenon is I'm going to cut just outside of these purple heart lines to about here on this side, here on that side. Yeah, that's square. So we're going to cut out this. That's going to act as our tenon. So let me trace this out, and then I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw, cut this out. draw this and then I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this material here. We're going to cut out all of this. That way when we sit this here, it'll have, you'll have zero seam. As where, with a bolt-on neck, you can see the neck through this side of the pocket. This is going to be more like a Les Paul, where it's a mortise and tenon full joint. So let me cut this out, and we can get to drawing out where this is going to fit, and then take it over to my router table, hog all of this out, and we need to figure out how tall the bridge is going to sit over the body so that I can calculate how deep I want this neck and fretboard to go. And so I got to do a few measurements, but let me cut this out first. All right, so I've got my tenon cut, and I've got the truss rod fit. I did end up losing this little piece. It's not a big deal. I can glue something else in its place, or, the cover is going to go over that. But I've got a nice smooth entryway right here that's real tight. The truss rod's really tight in there, so I don't need to add anything. It's a really good fit. So now what I need to do is make sure that I keep these wings, because I'm going to need them to attach some pieces right here to hide the fretboard. And I think they're not going to be very long. So you see this gap right here? Rather than have that gap, I'm going to take a piece of wood that came from this part of the neck and just glue in a piece right here so that it hides it. But I can't get to that until I've actually set the neck into the body, which brings me to this part. So I have my laser set up, and I have my center line on the body, and I've got the laser going directly through my center line. Let me see. This laser's moving a lot. What I do is I take my neck with the center line down my tenon and a center line up here on my headstock, and I line up the tenon cuts just a shy of where I'm going to actually install it. So I'll come in about 1/8 of an inch and set this guy on top of there. And then what we do is line up the laser to match that line with this line, and this line with this line, and that gives us our spacing. And so that's where the neck is going to sit. And I need to cut out this tenon. And so what I'll do is draw in, just right now, for reference, where about that is. And I'll actually come back with some boards and clamp some boards in place here so that I can run my router with a flush trim bit. The fretboard will sit about like that. And the fretboard's going to come to here. And so that's roughly what it's going to be. It's starting to look like a guitar. The next few steps, it goes by real quick. Once I get the neck set, I'll flatten the top again just to make sure, and then I really need to detail the actual shape of the body. But I want to go ahead and set the neck first, so that I can shape the body around the neck. And then eventually we'll get to come in with our bridge and see where about that's going to sit, and then decide how far north we want to make this P90 sit, and then trace out our pick guard. Since this is a non-traditional tele bridge, I don't know if I'm going to try to follow the same Telly's, pick guard setup, or if we want to do something else. But so far, it's coming together really easy. So we'll see how far I can get today on setting this actually in the body and gluing up the binding. But the truss rod is set. So I think I'm going to move on to cutting the tenon for the body. And that will be a really good place to stop today. So as I got to laying out the tenon, I started to measure the depth, the height of these saddles to get an idea of how deep I wanted the neck to go. I realized I haven't flattened the top of this body, and I don't like to mess with anything until the top is perfectly flat. So I'm gonna have to cut out the true outline and then sand it to that, and then I'll flatten the top and we'll get to cutting out the truss rod. See, all of this will be material that I'll get rid of, and there's my little heel cap, the bottom. This piece will fit in there. So what I'm going to do instead is I've cut the inside taper of my fretboard, and now I need to square each one of these sides so that I can attach my binding, and that will get the fretboard done. Once the fretboard's done, I can look at attaching it to the neck assembly, and then we'll be able to get a really, a good position for our bridge. So I'm just going to sit here and sand this until it's straight. Make sure to hit all the high spots first. And I need to draw in my my lip. I'm thinking about, that's pretty good. So there'll be a fret right there. Before I add the binding, I need to cut these slots just a little bit deeper. Last thing you want to do is have a slot that's not deeper than the tang on your fret, and so they won't seat properly. And you have to remember, I'm also going to radius this once I have some binding on here, and so the edges right here need to be deeper than the center. And I've done that before. You think you're getting deep enough, and those tangs look really small, but sometimes it happens. And that's why I've decided to exclusively do bound fretboards too. Fretboards that aren't bound, you always end up having some gaps right here that you have to fill. And with humidity and heat, the neck, it swells and it shrinks, and those fret ends stick out, and so it's always like you can feel them. And when you bind it, you don't get that problem as much, because you're going to cut the tang off, and it's just the tip of the fretboard that you're going to encounter when you're holding it. So I'm going to keep doing this boring sanding, and then hopefully I'll get to putting the binding on tonight. And I use super glue to hold the binding on. I could probably get both sides out of this one piece, but I don't want to risk cutting it and messing it up. And I've already got one straight side for the bottom, so it'll be overhang a little bit, but that's okay. I'd rather it be too big than too little. So I'll keep sanding and we'll add the binding, and then I need to cut some holes for the fret dots, and I'm going to use an epoxy with mica powder to fill the fret dots. So the beauty of that is I can choose any size bit. You know, you can go with a traditional Fender fret dot, which is probably like, what is this? Like a 1/4 inch bit. Fill it. I like, personally, I think the more elegant ones are the smaller fret dots. So maybe something that small. And since this fretboard is maple, I'm probably going to add some dark gray to the silver. I mean, I could even do blue. I need to talk to Nolan to see what he wants. But some dark gray would stand out on this fretboard, gray and the white. So I don't know. I need to get these sides done first though. So I've straightened each one of these edges on the fretboard, and I've cut the fret slots again. I've just made them a little deeper so that I don't run into the situation where they're not deep enough. I've also prepared each side of the binding. So that, it's gonna go like this. So what I do is I have a straight edge that I've got wedged up against some dogs in my bench. And then I'm gonna lay some super glue along the side of the frets, the side of the fretboard. And then I'm just gonna squeeze it here and make sure everything is pressed down and towards this, dam that I have built right here. Hold it, make sure that the glue sets up, and then pull it off. This should be attached. Then what we'll do is come back. This is a tricky spot. What I have to do for that, this binding is thick enough that I'll probably have to wet it. Yeah. So I'll dip it in some really hot water for a little while and then bend it. I save the the piece that I cut so I can use that as a clamp when I get to it. And then I make sure to leave an overhang down here because I'm actually going to cut this at probably a 45-degree angle so I can miter the other side when it comes in at whatever that angle ends up being, so they meet in the center rather than having one overlap on the other. It just looks nicer. So let me glue these up, and I think that's all I'm going to be able to do tonight. Tomorrow I'll be able to flatten the top, refine the shape of the top, and then we can get into cutting our tenon out. So I'm going to glue this up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Amber lamps. So here it is. I just need to cut off the excess on these guys, and then once I have these cut down to flush with the face, I'll do the lip at the bottom. Things all glued up, it looks good. So I'm gonna stop for today. But this guy is gonna fit right there, like about like that. It's gonna look real nice with those pinstripes. I'm excited. Yeah, just like that. Looks good. Starting to come together. All right, signing off.